Welcome. My name is James Strahan. I'm the president of the Arizona Architectural Foundation. We welcome everyone to our 10th year anniversary of our Archives Committee exhibit. And so we really appreciate all of you coming out and supporting the foundation. Okay, so many of you may not know who the Arizona Architecture Foundation is. In 1983, the Rio Salado Architecture Foundation was formed, and in 2001, the Central Arizona Architecture Foundation was formed. In 2022, we decided that our missions and our efforts were very similar in nature, so we decided to merge the two foundations. And as easy as that sounds, it's quite the ordeal to take two nonprofits and merge them with the IRS. So it's been a 2-year journey, but we're really close on getting that done. The mission of our foundation is to enhance the welfare of the state of Arizona by promoting excellence in architecture and the built environment, by supporting the education of future architects, supporting and promoting the profession of architecture, and really preserving the legacy of Arizona architecture. Our commitment to the endowments has afforded us opportunities that have been life-changing for emerging professionals. Over the 41 years as a foundation, we've given over 42 recipients of travel prizes, more than $155,000 in grants, and we've sent students and emerging professionals to over 50 countries and 7 continents. One recipient even to the top of Mount Everest. Partnering with the ASU Design School, with many of you here tonight. I see Alana and Paolo and Claudio. Thanks for coming. We've given over $625,000 in support of the Design School at ASU over 40 years. Our annual golf tournament, we had 41 years last year, and we're close to raising over $800,000 that support our mission. And then the Kurt Schaefer Memorial Lecture, which we had last week. We've brought in over 35 world-renowned architects over the years. And really, tonight, we celebrate the Archives Committee. Ron Peters, Doug Sidner. If you're on the Archives Committee, could you maybe raise your hand? And if you're a foundation member, could you also raise your hand? So we really thank you for all your years of service. But the Archives Committee is, their mission is to really preserve drawings, pre-1985 hand drawings of prominent Arizona architecture as well as Arizona architects. So tonight's really special with 3 people that'll talk about Wright's archives. To date, we've saved over 30,000 individual drawings. One of our partners here, the Arizona Historical Society, holds a lot of our collection, but we have collections in other universities at ASU, Tempe Museum, and different institutions, the state archives. There's a shortage of space for architectural archives, so we've been working with David and the Arizona Historical Society and try to find revenues to get maybe some funding to build an addition to this facility so we can continue our collection and have space to store it. To date, we've saved over 20 architects' collections, and we're currently maybe working on about 8 collections right now that we're trying to salvage. So it's an effort to go through and collect and save these archives, but we think it's valuable to the community and our heritage. So. These are some of the places in the world that we've sent travel prize winners to. And then some of the architects from around the world have spoken here in Arizona with our Kurt Schaefer lecture. Our sponsors, we really want to reach out and thank all the sponsors for making this event happen. Partnering with the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation has been great. Arcadia is our heritage sponsor, and then Arizona Historical Society. Our preservation sponsors, my firm 180, thank you, John, Troy and Marie-José for always ponying up some money. Carson Architecture and Design, thank you, Andrew. Gretchen at Air Park is here, a huge supporter of AIA and everything architecture. Thanks, Gretchen. My mom. When you're behind on fundraising, you call your mother. Right? So thank you, Mom. I think she might be watching by Zoom. Love you. Thanks for sponsoring. And CCBG Architects, Brian Cassidy's in the audience, so thank you, Brian. We have some archive sponsors, Ron Peters, Historic Streetscape, and Elizabeth Rosensteel. Elizabeth is here tonight. Thank you, Elizabeth. Appreciate your donation. And 3 friend sponsors, Doug Sidner. As most of you know, Doug has been the guy in this committee for 10 years, and he still remains active even though he's not the chair anymore, so thank you, Doug. Our new chair, Brandon Benzing, who's done a great job putting this event together, and Nadine Schiarani, thank you. And we're actually trying, and have after several years, we have an Instagram page and we have a website for the foundation. A couple of years ago when we decided to merge the foundation, we went through a rebranding process with Multi-Studio. And so if you can follow us on Instagram and go to our website for new events, we'd appreciate that. And one thing I'd like to also say is our collaboration with AIA on this event is really huge. John and Diana are here tonight, and so couldn't have been possible without their collaboration, so thank you. And with that, I'm going to join the heckling crowd up here. The speakers tonight, dear friends of mine, although Jennifer I've just met, but Fred, a speaker, has been a good friend for years. And the other speaker is actually my 4th year studio professor at LSU. So he's an expert in everything Wright, and I think you'll enjoy what he has to say. So thank you, Michael, for coming today. So with that, I'll turn it over to your committee chair, Brandon, and he'll take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Before we get started here with the presentation, thank you all for coming to celebrate our 10 years. If I could have all the archive committee members in attendance stand up, I just want to recognize them for all their hard work over the past 10 years, and especially for this event. It's been wonderful. So thank you all. And then also, as James had mentioned, to the AIA staff, John and Diana, they've been very influential and helpful in getting these type of events that we've done over the past several years when I've been in charge to get moving and actually come to fruition. So thank you. As you all know, the Archives Committee is part of under the foundation in partnership with the AIA, and our goal is to identify, locate, and place hand-drawn architectural drawings of significant architects and works in Arizona. We've been very proficient of that over the past 10 years. We haven't been able to save everything, and we're still able to identify and locate these collections. The challenge we're running into at the moment is placing them. And a lot of that challenge has to come with there's not much space anymore for archival collections of any type in the state of Arizona. So over the past couple of years, we've had a wonderful relationship with Arizona Historic Society here at the Arizona Heritage Center. They've been very generous with both their time with our committee and also allowing us to utilize their facilities for events such as this. And with that, I would like to thank them, Dr. Breckner and his staff, for that. And then with that, I would invite Dr. David Bregner to come up and say a few words as part of the Arizona Historic Society.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming out here on a nice, cool summer heat day here. How many of you have been to the Heritage Center before? A lot of hands, excellent, returning guests. How many of you use the archives at AHC? All right, we need to correct that number now. My name is Dr. David Breckner. I've been the executive director here at AHS for just over 2 years, which means I've only had the pleasure of seeing about 20% of all that this relationship has brought in and done for the people of Arizona so far. But in those 2 years, I can tell you one of the first groups I was introduced to, one of the first stakeholders and partners that I knew I had to meet was the AAF. The impact of what you do here is tremendous. As both a historian, former archaeologist, history is the story of progress, and we know that, you know that better than many. The struggle to build and build over what came before means that there's a phenomenal loss of that physicality, of that beauty of what's been put around and shaped cultures previously. But through the architectural drawings, through the work that this committee has done, that legacy can be preserved, can be shared, can be celebrated for future generations. And that is because of what you've done here. So first of all, I'd just like to thank you for that effort. Beyond that, looking ahead, it is a matter of space. It's a matter of storage. It's a matter of what do we do to make sure that those drawings, those pieces that are still out in the wild are retained, brought in, and celebrated. We are looking forward to a great future with that. Working with the AAF, we have a vision for that. We have a solution for that. We have a proposal. It is to an ambitious design, 15,000 square feet, and new annex to be brought in and built on to this building. Matching the award-winning designs already present, meeting the highest curatorial archival standards. We are working right now, not only the design, but also the fundraising, the solicitation. That work is ongoing. We'll see it across the next fiscal year, working right now and taking us into 2025. And by 2026, when we come back here in 2 more years' time, I really hope, I truly hope, that's not just a discussion, but a dream realized. So please keep following us, keep supporting us, keep doing everything you are doing to benefit the people of Arizona, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Breckner. And with that, we will move on to our program tonight. Our first speaker is Jennifer Gray. Jennifer Gray is the Vice President and Director of the Taliesin Institute at the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. Her research focuses on modern architecture and how designers and activists used architecture, cities, and landscapes to advance social change at the turn of the 20th century. Her work has been published in journals of architectural history and critical heritage. She has curated several exhibitions and published catalogs on Wright, including Frank Lloyd Wright at 150, Unpacking the Archive at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, and most recently, the Imperial Hotel at 100, Frank Lloyd Wright and the World, currently touring 3 venues in Japan. She serves on the board of directors for the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy. She has taught at the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation at Columbia University, the School of Architecture, Art and Planning at Cornell University, and at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. And she is the former curator of drawings and archives at the Avery Architectural and Fine Arts Library at Columbia University, where she received her PhD in architectural studies. So without further ado, Jennifer Gray.
Thank you, Brandon, and thank you to everyone for being here. As James alluded, because we just met, I am new to Arizona, so I've never been here before, and I'm really excited to meet many of these sponsors of these events and get to know the community. I'm not new to Frank Lloyd Wright, however, so hopefully I can share some of my stories. Let me click ahead. There we go. Given that one of the aims of this conversation is to explore different perspectives on how architecture archives are used, I thought I could give some background on myself and how I came to archives in general and to the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation archives in particular. I am an architectural historian by training, which means I can talk and write about the significance of buildings all day long, but I can't make one. I use archives in my own research all the time, not just Frank Lloyd Wright, but other archives, depending on the project. I want to point out that archives are critical to the production of new knowledge. They allow you to question received narratives and secondary texts by going back to the source. I'd also like to point out that archives aren't fixed. Interpretations of history change over time. Oftentimes history is more about the present moment than the past, and so an archive is never exhausted, even if you've looked at all of its pieces. I'm also a teacher. I try to incorporate archival visits into my classes as much as possible. I've learned they're really invaluable for students. As I get older, the students stay the same age. However, I've noticed over the past decade or so, it's even more valuable to bring them to an archive because they're born digital. And so they don't, they have lived always with digital technologies and reproductions and things like that in a way that I haven't. And so this teaches them how to do primary research. It teaches them how to engage primary sources, which means they have to look closely at objects and form their own opinions, not relying on other authors, other interpretations, and secondary texts. I think in a broad way, it's just important for them to realize not everything is digitized, and not everything is searchable on Google. For architectural students in particular, just studying these handmade drawings is invaluable. The technology of drawing changes over time. If you see some from 200 years ago versus the 1950s, the amount of information, if you saw our pop-up exhibition, conveyed on one drawing can be kind of immense. There wasn't as much paper, right? So they really put a lot of information on one sheet. So this is really eye-opening to students who are learning to design on computers. And lastly, I'm a curator of architecture exhibitions. Exhibitions are powerful vehicles for bringing academic work to the general public. And if you work in my field, you'll know that usually these exhibitions involve very close relationships between galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. We often abbreviate that as the GLAM kind of model, because that sounds good. I think this is especially true for architectural exhibitions, which by definition are shows of reproductions. When you go to an architecture show, you're looking at drawings of buildings, photographs of buildings, models of buildings. You're not usually looking at the building unless you go to a house museum or a one-to-one, kind of mock-up. And so by definition, they're all even more in the archive, maybe perhaps than other mediums. So why I'm opening like this is I just want to point out this kind of telescoping that I'm talking about from individual academic research to a larger scale of students to make a bigger impact to public programs for general audiences. Archives are not just for academics. They are engines that drive new ideas and perspectives for everyone. Oops, I'm in the wrong place here. Oops. Does it go on a timer? Okay, well, sorry, you got a little preview. All right, my involvement with the Wright Archive began over 10 years ago when the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, stewards of the two UNESCO World Heritage Sites of Taliesin and Taliesin West, partnered with Avery Architectural and Fine Arts Library at Columbia University and the Museum of Modern Art to transfer Wright's vast archive from Arizona and Wisconsin to New York. The aim was to make Wright's archive accessible to larger numbers of researchers and thus advance the global reach and relevance of Wright's work. The Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation archive is enormous and intact. Wright had been a savvy self-promoter and curator, keeping nearly all of his drawings, photographs, correspondence, scrapbooks, home movies, and more to use for his own exhibitions, publicity campaigns, and publications. He curated almost 200 exhibitions about himself during his lifetime, and these traveled the globe and were an important part of his practice. There are tens of thousands of drawings and photographs, almost 200 films, dozens of models, and countless letters in the archive. The treasure trove has provided historians, curators, and architects with substantial amounts of historical material with which to conduct deep research on Wright. As the Wright Archive was being packed and moved to New York, plans were underway to mount a major exhibition of Wright's work at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. A curatorial team was assembled, led by myself and Professor Barry Bergdahl, and research commenced, even as the archive continued to be shipped in stages and unpacked at Avery Library and the Museum of Modern Art. One of the goals of the exhibition was to surface understudied narratives and overlooked voices in Wright's work. This was a formidable challenge given the immense number of publications and exhibitions on Wright, not to mention the sheer weight of his own fame. Wright is a household name and arguably one of the first celebrity architects, appearing on numerous popular television programs during his lifetime, as well as the cover of Time magazine. The volume of content produced around this singular figure made it difficult to imagine saying anything new about Wright. To overcome this obstacle, a dozen guest scholars were brought onto the project. These include Ken Oshima from the University of Washington, Mabel Wilson from Columbia University, design curator Juliet Kinchin from MoMA, Matthew Skansberg from the Praxis Institute in Switzerland and a graduate of the school, Teresa O'Malley from the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts in Washington, D.C., and our own Michael Desmond from Louisiana State University. Some of these contributors, such as Michael Desmond, were established Wright scholars, but most of them were not. The idea was to engage experts in a variety of fields, from historians of landscape to scholars of industrial design, and ask them to bring their expertise to bear on Wright as a way to surface new perspectives and interpretations about this scion of architecture. A small exhibition was mounted at MoMA in 2014 to debut some of the early progress made in unpacking Wright's archive. Frank Lloyd Wright in the City, Density versus Dispersal, explored the tension between two little-known polemics of Wright's theories about cities, his fascination with skyscrapers on the one hand, and his concurrent theories on low-density development on the other. Several projects featured in the installation, including Wright's project for a mile-high skyscraper, which you can see in the, oops, I don't know what I'm doing with this. Several projects featured in the installation, including Wright's project for a mile-high skyscraper and his urban plan of Broadacre City, would be further investigated in upcoming exhibitions. And you can see the Broadacre model on the right-hand side, the very flat model. In the back wall, the drawings are the mile-high skyscraper, one of which was reproduced in our pop-up exhibition. After several years of work by scholars and teams at Avery Library and MoMA, Frank Lloyd Wright at 150 Unpacking the Archive opened at MoMA on June 8, 2017, Wright's 150th birthday. The title Unpacking was of special significance. It referred to the physical unpacking of Wright's archive in New York, but also to the intellectual unpacking that scholars conducted through their research in the archive. You sure this is not on a timer? In other words, the archive itself was as much the subject of the exhibition as Wright. The exhibition included almost 400 works, from masterpieces such as Falling Water and impressive models such as the Price Tower, to lesser-known archival films and graphic designs. Each section of the exhibition took an object from the archive to unpack by contextualizing it among other works and asking challenging questions that shed new light on Wright's practice. Wright's mile-high skyscraper project reappeared alongside works by Mies van der Rohe and was revealed to be a historical argument and publicity event as much as a realizable design. Wright's relationship with Jens Jensen and landscape was explored, with new research calling into question long-held ideas about a so-called prairie school of design. The myth of the prairie related to broad questions about colonization, displacement, immigration, and national identity that pervaded social and architectural discourse at the turn of the 20th century. The Imperial Hotel was contextualized in the broader context of Wright's fascination with Japanese prints and other projects he built in Japan. Newly conserved models told complicated stories about differences between architectural representation and actual buildings. And one of the fun things we figured out in conserving the Guggenheim model on the right-hand side is that the conservator was trying to match the color of the model to the building. And then we learned that the building had been whitened over time with more paint, and so originally it was a beigeur color. And so the question became, do we put it back to beige? We leave it white? Anyhow, we left it white, but it's interesting, these kind of things you uncover as you're working on these projects. A concurrent exhibition was mounted at the Wallach Art Gallery at Columbia University called Living in America, Frank Lloyd Wright in Harlem. The show explored challenging questions about Broadacre City, with its emphasis on private property, against the realities of poverty and public housing in the United States. An ambitious public education program, including lectures, courses, gallery sessions, and a creative makers lab, accompanied the exhibition. Many of these were led by the curators and scholars involved in unpacking the archive, providing the public a rare opportunity to engage directly with the people responsible for the arguments presented in the exhibition. It was also an opportunity to expand Wright's legacy beyond academics and specialists in architecture. Over 900,000 people attended one of the public education programs. No, 90,000, that would be really good if it was 900,000. Over 90,000 people attended one of the public education programs offered on the exhibition. And there's a much younger version of myself and Ken Oshima leading some of them. Unpacking the archive led to numerous other research projects that advanced Wright and his legacy around the world. In 2018, in collaboration with Avery Library again, we curated another exhibition called Frank Lloyd Wright, Between America and Italy, at the Pinacoteca Agnelli in Turin, Italy. This project explored Wright's practice in the context of his ongoing relationships with Italy, especially his unbuilt project for the Mazzieri Memorial in Venice, and Wright's connection to leading Italian architects such as Carlo Scarpa and Bruno Zevi. Wright first went to Italy in 1909 as part of the production of the Vossmith portfolio, if you know that set of lithographs, but he maintained a lifelong relationship with the country and with the ideas presented there and with the architects. In the post-war, Scarpa and Zevi, along with other architects of the Venetian school, were working to advance democracy in post-war Italy as a resistance to the fascism of the war years, and bringing Wright back in the 1950s, again with another major exhibition, was a big part of how they were trying to advance these ideas. Numerous publications ensued, with books having the power to circulate even more widely than exhibitions and reach even larger audiences. Indeed, Wright himself theorized on the democratic power of the printed word to educate and communicate across space and time. The newest iteration of this ongoing global unpacking of Wright is our current exhibition and book project, Wright's Imperial Hotel at 100, Frank Lloyd Wright in the World. The project celebrates the 100th anniversary of the architect's original 1923 hotel, Wright's first global commission, even as it continues to unpack themes first explored in New York in 2017, such as landscape and nature, progressive education, building systems, and more. Some of the threads that came out of this project, it was related to it was the anniversary of the hotel that prompted the project. However, we used that to tease out these other threads that kind of came in and out of the Imperial Hotel in terms of people who worked on the project and ideas that gestated in the hotel and then resurfaced elsewhere. And some of the more interesting ones that came out really emphasized Wright's relationship to Japanese landscape and the garden designs there and how he brought them back to the United States after he returned. Progressive education was a big part of this exhibition. Wright did not just build the Imperial Hotel in Japan, he built several other structures, including the Jayo Gakuen school, which was a very progressive school at the time, founded by a woman, a feminist. Many of these theories started dovetailing with feminism in general. Wright's clients, many of them were often activists, and one of the highlights was a section on Nobuo Tsushura, who was the first female designer in Japan. She met Frank Lloyd Wright when her husband worked on the Imperial Hotel, and they ended up traveling to the United States to work with Wright. So these interconnections between architecture and people and cultures just kind of continues throughout his practice. The exhibition's emphasis on the global nature of Wright's practice extends to the international team of curators, historians, and archivists who produced it, some of whom are in this room. This global team, some of whom collaborate on the New York exhibition, worked for over 2 years to realize this project, a collaboration made possible by new digital platforms such as Zoom and video calling, which Wright surely would have appreciated given his interest in the power of telecommunications. The Imperial Hotel at 100 is the first major exhibition on Wright in Japan in over 26 years, allowing an entirely new generation of architects, students, and others to engage directly with Wright's work for the first time, surely sparking further interest in Wright's legacy and continued relevance. The exhibition is traveling to 3 major venues in Japan, and so far has been seen by nearly 100,000 people, with the accompanying catalog entering its 3rd printing. In conclusion, archives are a critical part of the public humanities, and they have the potential to make an outsized impact on the world, not just in the number of people reached, but in the ideas and questions they raise. Each of the exhibitions I highlighted here, and of course there's many more, these are just the 3 I've worked on, but each of these approached Wright through a critical lens, asking questions about social and political issues, and challenging long-held beliefs about Wright and his architecture. Wright was many things, but at center he was an architect and an activist. He used his practice to engage bigger questions about education, inequality, affordable housing, livable cities, the environment, and more. questions that have contemporary relevance as we continue to struggle with many of the same questions. In other words, archives are not dusty boxes in library basements that are only used to produce esoteric arguments for academics like me. They are vital sources of new ideas about the world around us, and they have broad application for everyone. So I hope I've convinced you to save more archives in Arizona. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Next up, we have Michael Desmond. Michael is an architect turned to the study of history and of cities and culture. After earning his professional license and practicing in Louisiana and New York, he turned to the Graduate School of Design at Harvard for graduate studies in urban design and anthropology. That led to MIT and to a PhD in the history, theory, and criticism of architecture. He has taught architectural history and design in the LSU School of Architecture for over 30 years, most recently starting and directing a Doctor of Design in the Cultural Preservation Program, where he also teaches cultural theory. His research interests revolve around the role of architecture in society and include American architecture, urban history in the context of cultural mythology, and belief systems as a frame for evaluation of architectural forms. His doctoral research explores the community-scale work of Frank Lloyd Wright in relation to Emersonian themes in American history and the modernist interest in subject-object perception. Michael's publishing has been mostly focused on the continuities between Wright and American culture. He has published many essays on the aspects of Wright's work, including most recently, Abstracting the Landscape, Galesburg Above and Below the Surface, a chapter published in the Museum of Modern Art. In the catalog for the exhibition for Frank Lloyd Wright at 50, which, as Jennifer mentioned, he co-curated. Currently, he serves on the boards of the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation at Taliesin West and the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservatory in Chicago. His first book, The Architecture of LSU, was the result of a Getty Campus Heritage Grant won by Mary Ellen Trustee Art Publication Award for Excellence in 2013. A TED LSU talk summary of the themes of that book can be found by searching for Service and Sacrifice at tedxlsu.com. So with that, I'll welcome Michael Desmond to the podium.
This one's not connected to that, just so you know. So that one's going to change the slide.
Okay.
So,
Good luck, yeah.
We'll make it work.
Yeah, hi. Go Tigers. First, I want to really commend the Architectural Foundation and the Heritage Center for your... What's that? For the recording, yeah? Okay, I'll stay here. For your work with archives, it's a remarkably important thing. What I'm going to talk about is much more detailed than the kind of broad overview and exposure to the world, which is an important aspect of it. And I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the work that you're doing and the traveling fellowships. I had no idea there was architecture at the tip of Mount Everest. As Brandon said, I'm an architect. My father was an architect. I kind of grew up in the world and have had an interest in Wright since I was a child. I first started working in the archives at Taliesin West in the early 90s, and then have spent quite a bit of time in in the Avery, which is where Jen and I met. What I want to talk to you about today is a particular detail that you only find, the kind of thing you only find if you have the drawings, if you have access to the drawings. And the way in which that detail developed, it seems to have developed in Wright's work to a technique that represents an interest in perception and experience that then starts to show up more and more in his work and helps to understand, I think at least it helps me to understand, things that came later and to some extent things that came before. And to do that, we're going to talk about wing spread, a magnificent building. One of the things you find when you study in the archives is all of the record of a project like this, all of the drawings, and you spend time trying to put them in sequence and understand how the ideas develop and how does one thing lead to another. And it used to be that drawing a perspective, an aerial perspective like this, was a real laborious process. And Wright would have the apprentices do the layout of the drawing, and if the point of view was good, then he would do an overlay and render it. Sometimes there are more than one study sketch. Sometimes there are lots and lots of study sketches like that. Only, they're very labor intensive, so only when it was about a really important issue. In these two drawings of wing spread, for example, the one on your left was an early sketch that did not get used for our final rendering. It was redrawn to show the one that's more in the center there. And so, you scratch your head about that and say, okay, well, what does that one say that this one doesn't? Why would he do that? That's one of the things I want to talk about as we go through. And to do that, I'm going to back up just a little bit and look at falling water. Wing spread was begun on the heels of the Johnson Wax Company. It was designed for Hibbert Johnson, the owner of the company, just as Falling Water was being finished. And Falling Water, as you all know, is a very unique building. This famous rendering of it, a view that you don't see when you go there unless you climb down in the muddy stream originally, was studied and studied and studied. And these aren't all of them. Probably more aerial perspectives studies than any building he did. And one of the things that I find really precious about, I'm going to go back now. This will let me go back. And one of the things I find really interesting is the way in which the frame of the waterfall is oriented with the frame of the page, so that the building appears to be moving, spinning, I'm going to say, in that frame. And that spinning, and this shows up, I guess we don't have a pointer, but that shows up in almost all of these drawings. That spinning is anchored back on the bridge, the automobile bridge that he built. All right? And in the wing spread, these things don't talk to one another, do they? Okay. Yeah. In the wing spread drawing, the line of the deck, the plaza, that's the horizontal line, and that is, in fact, I'm going to go back so we can see that a little more clearly. This line does the same thing that the line of the waterfall in the Falling Water drawing does. It anchors and provides a pivot or a reference for this twisting effect that you see in the building. And when you get to the site plans, you see that idea of motion a lot. It's pretty clear. The aerial photograph that he published in the 1938 Forum, which, as far as I can tell, may be the first aerial photograph he ever published, also highlights that dimension, that notion that the building is moving, spinning somehow. In the final plan, a complex, one of the most complex plans he did, you see a layering of this effect. The plan is composed of a great central room anchored on a magnificent hearth with 4 or 5 different fireplaces in it, and the 4 wings coming out of the house. Wright had talked to Johnson about an idea he had for a 4-zoned house, and they decided to explore it. In some of the early site plan studies, you see this notion of spinning and its relationship to the driveways develop. You also start to see in these drawings pages that are cut, all right? Big sheets of paper that are cut so that they could be rotated on the drawing board. So if we focus in on this one, you can see it a little better. Or another big study sketch where the rotation of the building and the relationship to the stream, which Johnson had dammed for the Canadian geese to land, and the curvilinear aspect of the roads. On this big sketch, something that's very, very rare in the probably thousands of Wright drawings I've looked at over my life, there's a little perspective sketch. Most of us, most of us that grew, that learned architecture from using pencils and drawings, you would do these little study sketches, these in the marginalia of drawings. In Wright's case, almost none of those. And so something like this, there's a blow-up of it, is very unique. And what it shows you is the central part of the tower of the building as seen from the automobile across the landscape as you're coming to it, okay? The difference between those first 2 wing spread perspectives that we looked at is that the one that they used shows the horizon and the wall as a datum so that you see the building spinning in an actual landscape that you can envision. The first one, and there are others that they didn't use, don't show that horizon, so it's not contextualized in that sort of way. The very first drawing of wing spread is this large piece of paper. There's a copy of it in the exhibition outside. I think an actual size copy. It's a big sheet of paper. And you see what a mess it is. This is unusual in Wright's work. He was a very skillful designer and had ideas that he used and repeated over and over and over again. And when you find drawings and sets of drawings that he really struggled with, well, you know, okay, something's going on here that's really interesting. And in this one in particular, what I want to call your attention to is a little marginalia here on the sketch. I don't know how well you can see it. I'm going to blow it up. It's there. And then for emphasis, I'm going to make it a little stronger. In the correspondence, which plays an important role, the 2 of them talk about the 4-zoned plan. And specifically in relation to the Drake Hotel in Chicago, which was a hotel both of them liked a lot. And the story that I have learned is that apparently Johnson gave Wright a little sketch that he had made of a house with 4 wings coming off of it when Wright started designing the building. That sketch doesn't exist, but there's this little thing on the bottom of the plans, right, which is really interesting. And what Wright does with that, wrong button. What Wright does with that, here I'll blow it up a little bit and show you in the context of the plan itself. What he does with that is that he started the drawing, I'm tethered to this microphone. He started the drawing of the plan with the 4 wings in the position shown in this little diagram, which otherwise, how would you know? And drew first the hearth the central living room, and then the bedroom wing, probably the most important wing for the Johnsons. And then somewhere along the way, he decided to move it, and he cut out that piece of paper, rotated it, pasted it back on, and pasted other sheet of paper in that was cut to fill the hole. Okay? And this is on a sheet that he's been moving around on his drawing board. Right? Now, all of you that have done design buildings and made plans, you know, you work on a plan for a little while, a sketch or even a more developed plan, and you come back the next day to work on it. And if it's not sitting on the board in the way that you're familiar with, you turn it back to the way it is. It doesn't look right. It doesn't make sense to you, right? I mean, I assume everybody has that experience if you've designed. Wright was intentionally turning these things to disorient or to give himself a different kind of perspective on the way they worked. I just found that really fascinating. When you get to the final or the first convincing hardline plan, the sheet's cut. He was still doing it. He's still moving this thing around. And in fact, here I've ghosted in these previous little wings, and you can see that they show up as ghosts in the plan. So in changing from one of these forms to another, what he's done is he's taken a form that's bilaterally symmetrical in two directions along two axes, and therefore static. And he's made it much more dynamic and asymmetrical. And then to reflect the power of the asymmetrical form, he's added these ghosts of this earlier form. So there's like layers of design going in this that have to do with the position of this building on the sheet. It's a pretty interesting process. And the only way you see this kind of thing is if you have the drawing to go through. So 37 is when wing spread started. 38, he starts to work on a model for affordable low-cost housing in Ardmore, Pennsylvania, that he called Suntop Homes. Fascinating story. Eventually, they built one unit. He was trying to get the cost of each individual unit. They built one four-square building. He was trying to get the cost of each individual unit down to about $3,600, and they couldn't quite get it there. And then the investor finally said, well, we can't get it cheaply enough. But here it is, this notion of rotation and spinning right from the start, and it starts with little cutout pieces of paper that he starts moving around and spinning to try and create relationships so that you get the sense of this thing as moving by juxtaposing different frames of reference in the plan. Here's the final plan. One of them was built and is there today, and if you ever have a chance to visit it, it's really remarkable. It's a way of presenting different frames of reference, juxtaposing different contextual references at the same time, and creating a much more complex experience of what the architecture is like and its relationship to the larger context, because he's offering you various possibilities that, in one sense, you might say are unresolved, that challenges you to do that on your own. And when he draws the plan to publish, visual aid, he draws it so that each of the four levels show in the spinning way, so that if you're going to follow the plan, you've got to move it. And when he publishes it in the Natural House, I mean, it's a square plan, he publishes it, so you got to turn the book. And if you want to see that, right? This notion of rotation gets to be stronger and stronger in his work. And one of the photographs that depicts something of this, the automobile, which Wright came to call in this part of his career a new standard of space measurement, giving us a different sense of the landscape, the scale of a regional landscape, and the character of a regional landscape that he wanted to bring into his houses. You see that and the role of the automobile in a really carefully selected photograph. So this notion of motion. And, of course, Taliesin West was going on at this time as well. And then finally, in 1941, he was commissioned to do defense housing for the U.S. government in Massachusetts, 90-something units. And the government gave him a site that he thought was a monotone, uninteresting site. They visited a rocky hillside, one that he really liked, but the government agent said, no, it's too expensive to do plumbing on that. Let's do this site. And so he creates a kind of an urban context, and he does it using this notion of rotation again and juxtaposition of different forms. Here's the final plan. Ultimately, it wasn't built, but he did the drawings and got paid. Remarkable plan, and he did it by cutting out little pieces of paper and moving them around and studying relationships. It was all before computers, right? And one of the things that starts to show up is this notion of simultaneous presentation of different frames of reference. So in this project, you would have seen each fourplex as an object building, and they were similar to the ones for Ardmore, but a little expanded, a little more roomy. You would have seen each one of these as you drive through in your car, but then when you get out, go into your unit, actually the figure ground shift that happens, you see the one across the diagonal as your neighbor, not the one around the corner, all right? This change of shift that happens, and at least in my work, all because he's cutting up these drawings and moving them around, and I'm just trying to figure out, well, why is he doing that? It's such a crazy thing to do, right? And if those archives didn't exist, who would know, right? To even look for that. And this technique then has a big effect on the rest of the work he follows. This is the rendered plan of one of the versions of Parkland Village in Kalamazoo, and he did it with little cutout pieces of paper that he moved around to try and position one of the most remarkable unbuilt houses in 41, the house for Nesbitt down by Carmel, where he has the same thing, a little plan that he moves around, and all this is done in the same time period and context of the Jester house, which I just like so much I wanted to bring it in and put it in this. Thank you.
Our last speaker is Fred Prozzillo, who is the Nord McClintock Family Vice President of Preservation and Collections for the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, overseeing the preservation of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites of Taliesin, Taliesin West, and their collections. Fred received his Master's of Architecture degree from Taliesin, the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture. While at Taliesin, he was invited to intern with the renowned preservation architects Sandy Kentro and Associates, and worked at the temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia and the historic Ghats of Kathmandu in Nepal. Before returning to Taliesin to lead the preservation efforts in 2012, Mr. Prozzillo worked with Allen and Phillips Architects on the award-winning rehabilitation of the local icon, the Hotel Valley Ho, right down the street in Scottsdale. Today he serves on the board of directors of the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservatory and is the Taliesin West site representative to the Frank Lloyd Wright World Heritage Council. So with that, I welcome Fred Prozzillo. Thank you, Fred. You can just click to advance. We can shut. Do you want this, or do you want me to turn it down?
You can turn that down.
Thank you, Brandon, and thank you to the committee for having us tonight. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and move from drawings to images. Taliesin West, as you probably all know, this was Frank Lloyd Wright's laboratory in the desert. Came here in 1938, found this site at the base of the McDowells, and started building his winter camp. Right? This was a very impermanent space. It was a place where he and his apprentices could play with architecture, materials, forms, and it was a site that was unencumbered by a client, so he could do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, at any time. I just love this image. Around 1942, looking out over the valley. So when the apprentices and Wright would come down to Scottsdale in the winter, you know, they were just camping out on the land, building, and Wright would sketch up some drawings on buff paper or butcher paper, hand them to an apprentice who was then in charge of the construction, and let them go at it. A day or so he'd come out, look at something and say, well, let's move this wall over here, let's change this, and you know, almost immediately the drawings were useless. So today, I don't have drawings to go on for the preservation work at Taliesin West. I have to rely on photographic history. And so I'm here to tell you, save the drawings, but also save the photography, okay? And we have tens of thousands of images in the archives. We're lucky in that almost every apprentice that went through the program photographed the sites, and then we're lucky enough to receive them as gifts at some point. So we can learn a lot by looking at these images. And I'll run through a few images from the construction of the Cabaret Theater that tell us a lot about life on the property and how they went about constructing the site. All right, so here we can see that it was a site where they were learning by doing, right, getting out there and learning with the transom. We get to learn through the historic images about how the construction was carried out. This really interesting image here of the slip form of a tower on the Cabaret. Just a little bit of steel placed in the concrete roof of the Cabaret. Later, there were some issues with that roof because of the pushing the limits of the materials that Wright liked to do. There's just a couple pieces of 1-inch square bar in that roof that caused it to start to come down when he pulled the formwork out. And so he had to be a little creative and come up with a fix for that. We learned a lot about kind of techniques. We learned that the posts that support the concrete roof were poured in a plaster formwork, and here they reused the formwork over and over. You can see a couple of the posts were poured. Here they are cleaning up the forms and prepping them for the next post. We get to learn about who did the construction. Here's a photo of Wes Peters. Wes was a big hulking guy, over 6 feet, and he was known to be the wheelbarrow runner up the ramps. So here they had this special wheelbarrow where they welded on a rebar at the front, and Wes would pull and somebody would push, and then Wes would dump, which I always find amazing. All these photos that we have of them building Taliesin West, all the guys are ripped, like super buff. And it's because they have to do this kind of work. Again, here's an image that helped us when we were doing some work with the University of Pennsylvania, doing a historic structures report on this building. Stories said that there were only a couple series of 1-inch bar crossing the roof structure and a 1-inch bar running down each length and down the center. And that was probably why the roof failed when they started pulling the forms down. But these images helped Penn look at locations. We did some x-rays of the roof structure to try to determine, okay, that's what failed. What did he add to make it work? We're still working on that today. Here's an interesting image. Here's that little post, that plaster form that I showed you a second ago. They've got the post poured, but there's no rebar coming out of it to go into the roof slab. And I went back and I looked, and yeah, there's a cold joint between the top of that post and the roof. So, I mean, he was always just pushing the limits, doing crazy stuff. So, you know, the images help us really understand how things were put together, and you know, who was doing the work, and how it was being carried out. The photography can also lead to discovery. In 2019, we resurfaced all the fountains on the site. In the 70s, Olgavana, Wright's wife, painted the fountains this swimming pool blue that you see in the middle here. During Wright's time, the fountains were all raw concrete. Sorry. What you see here. And so we wanted to get back to that natural appearance. And, you know, as I was looking at doing the research, looking at these images, you know, I got to notice that these fountains for Wright were really meant to be a lot more natural, not swimming pool blue, not to be pools. And as I kept digging, you know, and he would add these rocks and plants, and they looked like muddy frog ponds, really, not like fountains. And as I started digging in and looking, I started to realize, you know what, that's gravel and dirt around the fountain. It's not concrete and, you know, paving, right? And if you go back to this one, it's a muddy kind of frog pool, and you can see some stripes here. As I really started to dig in, I realized these panels, these are currently red concrete seeded with pea gravel. It was a repetition, a pattern through the main walkway of the site. During Wright's time, when the pools were these muddy frog ponds, these panels were gravel and dirt, right? So it started dawning on me, what he's doing, he's bringing the desert, right, the natural landscape, and blending it in with the man-made landscape, right? Right, love to blur the line between interior and exterior space. And here, with this, with these gravel panels and the natural ponds, he's really, you know, blurring the line between the man-made and the natural. So I was very excited to see that, and can't wait to now take out the seeded stuff and bring back the gravel. So that's great. So, you know, photos can lead to really great discoveries. We use the photographs for programming and reconstruction of elements. This is the garden room at Taliesin West, and on the left here you see it as the Wrights inhabited it. This is Wright over here. Looks like he has a migraine from Iavana playing the harp. And you know, so this space was their living room. This is where they were hanging out. This is where they escaped the community and could have family time. After the Wrights passed away, the fellowship started using the space for the community, right? And it was set up differently. It was set up as an assembly space where people, you know, could sit around, multiple tables. It lost that homey kind of feel, right? So we wanted to bring that back, and so we used the historic images to really address how it was laid out. We learned that a couple of tables had been removed. and they needed to be reconstructed. So we used images to reconstruct the tables. The bench seating, the side of the room was changed. In 2010, Bruce Pfeiffer, our archivist, funded reupholstery of the room, and so he changed the room to a 1970s color palette that Olga Vanna enjoyed, which was orange in color. We wanted to get it back to the 1950s, a period when Wright was occupying the space. So, we went back to these kind of reds and blues and yellows and some greens. But, we had to reconstruct the bench. We had to reconstruct these tables. So we gathered up as many images as we could, and we started looking, okay, where is that bench on the stone wall? The stone wall is still there. We know that, there's a stone right there, right? So how many inches up from the floor is that stone? Okay, that's up there. And how big is that stone? Okay, if that stone's this big, then, we can extrapolate that the bench is now 3 inches because we're looking at the stone and we can measure the stone, right? So there's all kinds of stuff you can dig out of these images that are really fantastic. We were able to figure out how high, again, the table was because we could see where it lined up with the stones over here and this where it lined up with the stones over there. So there's great information that you can mine out of all of these images to allow you to get back to what we were able to do. This was 2019 or 2020, and get back to, again, setting the space the way Wright would have experienced it. And it allows us photographs to discover and return items to the spaces. This little iron teapot was found in a box in our archives and in our collections with a number of other family items. And one of our collections members noticed it and said, I think I saw that in an image somewhere, and recognized it in this photo here, sitting on the table. And she's like, well, we need to put that back, right? So we did a little more research. We found other images. Here's an image of it sitting the side of the fireplace. And we have these historical images so we could return it to its rightful place. So, it leads to informing us how the place was occupied, constructed, used, how we can use it to reset spaces, reprogram spaces, and then I want to run through a project that we're working on currently that is a larger project that is a large restoration project to bring back fabric roofs to Taliesin West. So when Wright was on the site, the roofs were canvas, 2x4 frames wrapped in cotton duck canvas, and then these panels were stepped in between built-up beams, right? It was very dynamic. There was a lot of poetry. I think it was just really beautiful because panels opened, they moved. It changed drastically in the 60s when there was a fire at the Biltmore and the architectural practice had to stay year-round. They added air conditioning, and then to keep the air conditioning in the spaces, they took out the canvas and put in fiberglass in the roof, thinking that would be a little better than the fabric. And that move, I can't blame them. I understand why they did it. They were trying to be a little more comfortable in the summer, but it really changes the character of the structure, right? Very different building. So we really want to get back to the fabric roof. And again, what's that? Yeah, I'll be standing in the back as well. But here's some great images that we've seen. Them working on replacing the fabric panels. We learned that the canvas only lasts around 2 years in the desert sun before it deteriorates. So this was a process every 2 years they were working on. We see a lot of change over time. Again, this idea of this place being a laboratory, a place where Wright was experimenting. Here we have an image with panels. Here's a straight run of canvas at one time. different beam designs. Here's one where he had lapped boards down the center at one point, trying to fix that shear. And again, single panels. Right, so all these things we've learned and looked at, and there were times where panels changed for cross ventilation, eaves for sitting and enjoying outdoor spaces. So through these images, we learned that, again, a lot of change over time. And I'm going to run through a couple of images here just of his office to show you some of the work that we've discovered. So from this very early, moving on, decorative elements added. A lot of elements here. Again, images help us with the landscape, how lush it was at one point, right? But looking at all these images and trying to figure out how we go back to a fabric roof, we came to learn that there were 4 major beam designs that Wright went through during his time. And this was, again, all learned through researching historic images. And so for this work to bring back fabric roofs to Taliesin West, we had to make a couple of decisions on roof beams and fabric. Right? So a lot of research went into the structures, the change over time. We were able to use oral histories and photographs to determine a lot of information. We found a little piece of canvas stuck between 2 beams that were nailed together that I know were never replaced. So we found the canvas that they used, and so that allowed us to do some research on different fabrics to try to make a match. Right? And so with an understanding of the beam construction, fabrics, we started about designing a new system for our fabric roofs, something that would be contemporary yet still hold the historic values and characters that Wright would have experienced. So at Taliesin West, we use a values-based preservation approach to our work. This is a technique that, or a process that is very common in Europe and in Australia, but here we kind of tend to use the period of significance approach, where you pick a period of significance, and then you basically freeze your building in amber, at that date. I always use the example of Appomattox Courthouse, where Lee surrendered to Grant, right? They picked that day in April 1865, and they've restored that building to that point, and it's never going to change. Because Taliesin West was a laboratory, and it was changing every year with the Wright, we didn't feel that was a good approach for this site. We wanted to be able to express the inherent change over time in the site, so we went with this values-based approach and let the values of the site guide our preservation decisions, right? So for Wright, the important values of the site were that it was a camp, right? This idea that he lived in these great pavilions with canvas roofs, very important to him. So we started using those values, design a new approach for the structure. And so we came up with an aluminum frame system with a fiberglass fabric that we're going to be hopefully installing on the site. So here's our phase. We're at phase 3 right now. We just completed phase 2, where we did some environmental studies on the spaces so we can understand the environment of the space with the acrylic roof that is on there currently. We use that to do some computer modeling of the spaces, testing different fabrics, sewing some insulation between fabrics to see what might be a good solution for us. We have a set of drawings that we're ready to now find a partner. As you can imagine, going to roofers and giving them this crazy fabric custom building, they're not all that excited to give us a warranty. So we're currently at the phase where we're really trying to do some PR on the project, find a good fabricator to partner with us, and then hopefully in the very near future take Wright's office, turn it into a full-scale mock-up, test the system that we've designed, and hopefully tweak it over a year or two, and then eventually employ that system on the living room, the studio, and the pavilion. So all a project that I would have never been able to do without having great historic images. So that's what we're doing at Taliesin West. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. So we do have time for a couple questions, if anybody has any out there that they'd like to ask. Well, I'm going to hand you guys the mic because I have a question. So let me grab this mic. I don't know which one of you would want to start with answering this, but you all talked about discovery and interpretation of the archives in various forms. And I just wanted you to talk a little about maybe contemporary influences on Wright's works of other practitioners at the time, if any of that was found in the archive, or any value that has been found in other archives you might have seen that point back to Wright at the same time. Do we have any other questions out there? Oh, you want?
I guess I'll also stand up here and embarrass myself. I'll talk about Wright's archive, but other archives I've worked in. I can't speak so much to how it was influencing other contemporary architects at its time, but I will say that, for example, Jens Jensen, I used that example earlier. When I was researching in the archive, the Frank Lloyd Wright archive, Wright it's all about Wright in the Wright archive, right? So to Michael's point, like you'd probably excise things that showed that he was influenced by others, or that kind of thing. However, if you cross-reference stuff you find in that archive with other archives, you really do start to see full stories being told. So, for example, there is a Jens Jensen archive. There's two of them. There's one at the Bentley in Michigan, and there's one at the Morton Arboretum in Chicago. And when you cross-reference those drawings and the correspondence with what's left in the Wright archive, full stories emerge about like their infighting, about what landscape designs were going to happen and then didn't happen, and why. Their politics get discussed in this. So, in the Wright archive, the correspondence you're getting is the things that came back to him, right? You're not always seeing the whole picture. And so I do think going to multiple archives, you do start to knit together a story that's more whole than going to one. So that's just been one of my experiences. Also, I'll add, since I kind of talked about it from the aspect of curating exhibitions, that the objects you choose to show in the exhibition are not usually the kind of like messy ones with the holes cut out and things like that. Either those are actually probably so fragile you couldn't show them in an exhibition, but they're messy. They're like the working drawings or the kind of thought process or something. You show the fancy perspective. It looks really pretty and people want to see it, right? So one of my big discoveries, there's many of these, but just to use an example I talked about, the Jensen graphic is a pretty unknown graphic design that Wright did for his friend Jens Jensen. However, there's sketches of it that are highly annotated, and so this is where I learned like all that connection to like colonization and the displacement of Native Americans. It's in that sketch actually, so it's not something you would normally show, and so I never would have found that if I hadn't been in an archive, because it doesn't have the pretty value of that, right? So that doesn't quite answer questions, but maybe just a few case studies of how archives can recycle upon themselves like that.
One of the things that we didn't talk about tonight in archives that's really crucial is the correspondence. I think over 300,000 pieces of correspondence in Wright's that are all cataloged. And for example, one of the things that comes out is his real fondness for Elio Saarinen, Eero Saarinen's father. In public print, all I find that he ever said about him was he was the best of the eclectics, which is kind of maybe not great. But in some of his letters back and forth and about Saarinen, he's very warm, and you can see that he was really very fond of him. So you get that dimension that you wouldn't otherwise get. You see the private side of the guy much more.
We had a question over here.
So Fred, I want to say that I'm very happy you're going to put the canvas back on the roof of the drafting room so I can experience it finally. But, you know, that was a good idea when it was just a winter camp. But how are you going to compensate for the heat gain now?
So we learned through our studies that because of the slope of the roof and the low roof, that the radiant gain on your head, I mean, you're never going to get beyond that, right? You're always going to be kind of uncomfortable, right? What we're planning to do is, through our computer modeling, we can take 2 layers of fiberglass fabric. There's a insulation called, I always get it, I think it's aerogel. Sometimes I want to say nanogel, but I think it's aerogel. It's a matte insulation, allows light transmittance through, and we can get a few R, out of that, right? So what our goal to do is to get us comfortable on the shoulder months, right? April, October, a little bit into May, a little bit into September, so we can use the spaces. We're going to eliminate some of the glass that was added after Wright's time, so we can open up the building, get cross ventilation. That'll all, we believe, through our computer modeling, will make those shoulder months acceptable. We're not going to be using those spaces in the summer, the heat of the summer. I mean, the buildings just were not designed for that, and we're not going to change the buildings to the point where we're going to make them habitable in the summer. And so that just kind of goes into then what do we do for programming. That's when Jen and the Taliesin Institute go to our sister property in Wisconsin, use the spaces there, and that was our decision.
Thank you. And as long as I got the mic, I'm going to keep talking. So Ms. Gray, you're no longer at Columbia now, though. You're at Taliesin, correct?
Yes.
Okay. But if I go to Columbia, how easy or difficult will it be for me to get into the archives? I mean, you say they're accessible. Can you define accessible?
Yes. So a couple words about my space. I seem to have followed the archives. So I've been hijacked by the Wright archives. So again, they're really important, these archives. They can change your whole life. So yeah, I was in New York for a long time, and I moved here. I now work at the foundation. By happy coincidence, my colleague, Teresa Harris, who's the director of Avery Library, I'll let her answer the question since she's currently in charge of the archive, and I'm just asking her to let me use it all the time.
Hi. They should be very accessible. The biggest problem we have right now is there's so much demand. You might have to wait a few months to get in, but we're open to everyone. You don't need to prove what you're researching. You don't even need to tell us necessarily why you want to see the materials. You don't need to be a member of the Columbia community. It's open to everyone. So you should be able to access them. And we have really great finding aids and all kinds of ways of navigating the collection on the internet. So you can do a lot of research. And we're going to be putting more things up. We're going to start, just in the next few months, we're going to launch our digital archive too. So for example, we're in the middle of digitizing all of the residential drawings. Those images that you saw out there, it's what we produced for the digital archive for the most part, and they're all going to be available on the web so that even if you can't come to New York, you'll also be able to experience some of the richness of that archival material.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you, Fred, Jennifer, and Michael. It was an amazing presentation. Obviously, the panel restoration is super exciting, being a local Arizona native and student at ASU in the MARC program. What opportunities will there be now and into the future for students to collaborate on it? On a personal note, one of my highlights was having the privilege of working on the ongoing restoration of the desert shelters back in my undergrad in 2014, so that opportunity for hands-on experience was amazing, so I don't know if that's something that could be on the horizon.
Yeah, we love having students out to Taliesin West because it continues that legacy of using the site as a training space, right? We have a good partnership with a number of universities. I mentioned Penn. We're developing a great partnership with ASU right now, so there will be studio opportunities coming in the future, which will be great. This idea of working on the shelters, we're working real hard to bring that back. And maybe, Jen, you want to talk a little bit about the Taliesin Institute?
Sure. So why I'm here, aside from the archive, is not all about the archive, despite my argument. Why I'm here is that I lead up a new higher education initiative at the foundation called the Taliesin Institute. And so the goal of the institute is to bring more university students to work on our campuses. They were always spaces for learning and making and experimenting and practicing and changing. So we don't want to lose that. And I would argue that the preservation of that process of students building things and making things and having a community, that's as equally important to preserve as the physical fabric. And so we've been partnering with over 25 universities at this point to bring students onto campus for residencies. Some of these are as short as a day or two, some are up to a month. We've started very intense conversations with ASU faculty, so we're working right now to build out a design program, a studio program, as Fred said. In terms of the shelters, that's our kind of next step that we want to do. There's nobody living in them right now, and so when students were in them, it was sort of a built-in maintenance, system essentially, because they would fix them up right when they were in them. And so now that they're empty, they're kind of going back to nature. And so the first step, I think, will be preservation studios, where students will come out and document the shelters and then fix them, and then following that, new construction of shelters. And we've had conversation about how much new construction. We don't want to overdevelop the desert, so to speak, with the desert shelters. There's about 98 sites out there, so it's could potentially get overcrowded, but there's demountable options and all different kinds of ways that we could experiment with new techniques. So these are in the works, so stay tuned for that kind of thing. It's something that Fred and I are working really closely on to do exactly that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So please come.
One last question. Oh, two questions.
I had a question about the archive space at Taliesin West, how it's being utilized today. Are there still collections in there?
I'm going to call Rebecca Hagan to the stage.
Here, I can bring the microphone around.
Another happy coincidence is that our director of collections at the foundation is also here. So I'm just going to call on all kinds of people to randomly talk unprepared like.
I'm glad I showed up to the talk tonight. As a guest, I'm Rebecca Hagan, the Bruce Brooks Pfeiffer Director of Collections and Archives. And so we do have an extensive collection that's still at Taliesin West and Taliesin. So we have our own institutional archives, so that's more of the foundation's history, which was started in 1940 by Wright. And then we have their personal belongings. We have the fellowship's creative output. They're making art, they're making music. We have a library on site that was, started mainly as part of the school program for accreditation. So we have this new opportunity with a lot of recent retirees, which is an unfortunate, it's sort of institutional loss, but we've hired a few new a few new positions. And I just joined about a year ago after working at Falling Water, and we're really pushing access to the collection physically, digitally, getting things online, similar to what Terry was talking about for the collection at Avery. So stay tuned. We want to be sharing the collection more in every way that we can.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll close with a quick story about working with Fred. Our firm has been very fortunate to have worked over 12 projects on Taliesin West Campus, and for a UNESCO World Heritage Site, it's quite the honor. One of the projects, Fred had a crumbling roof in the kitchen, and he said, I need you to replace the roof. And he said, you have to replace it during the summer. So he has me tear the roof open in the middle of the summer with monsoon seasons coming. And for whatever reason, they had the main fiber optic line ran through the kitchen, through the concrete, and I had to protect it to not shut down the whole facility. So we have the roof completely demolished. There's wires hanging everywhere. It's just a mess. It's about 10 o'clock at night, and my wife and I are checking the weather. I'm like, grab some towels, we gotta go. She's like, what? I say, grab as many towels as you can. Remember that? So we drive all the way to Taliesin, about 40-minute drive from downtown or central Phoenix, and we start putting towels because the roof is just, we had plasticed everything, but it was so much water because the roof is in a well. and we had water going everywhere. So we're on hands and knees putting barriers, trying to divert the water away from the drafting studio. And if you know the drafting studio, there's a portrait of Frank Lloyd Wright all the way at the end. And so imagine you're on your hands and your knees trying to prevent the studio from getting flooded, and he's just staring at you. And Lee and I are like, what the are we doing? But we're like, he's watching at all times. So anyway, it's been an honor to work on that campus, and appreciate you guys speaking tonight. It was great, different perspectives from each of you, so thanks.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of the whole Architectural Archives Committee, thank you to Jennifer and Michael and Fred for speaking tonight, and for all of you for attending tonight. This has been one of our best turnouts we've had in 10 years. We've been doing, 7 years we've been doing events. So thank you all very much. And like James said in the opening, if you would follow our Instagram page for the foundation, there will be archive content on there, as well as foundation art content on there for forthcoming events and just announcements. So find us that way. Thank you.